There's a particular 80-mile stretch of desert highway between my town and my parents' place that I don't drive anymore, not after what happened last fall. It's a desolate ribbon of asphalt cutting through an ocean of sand and rock, with nothing but Joshua trees for company. Before the incident, I loved that drive. The solitude, the vastness of the sky, the feeling of being the only person left in the world. I used to make the trip every couple of months, a pilgrimage back to the familiar comforts of my childhood home. This time was no different, or so I thought. I was heading back for my dad's 60th birthday, a surprise party we'd been planning for months. I left my city apartment just after dusk, hoping to miss the worst of the traffic and roll into my parents' driveway around midnight. The first hour was perfect. The city lights faded in my rearview mirror, replaced by a blanket of stars so thick you could almost touch them. I had my favorite playlist humming through the speakers, the windows down, and the cool desert air whipping through the car. It was a feeling of pure freedom. I was about halfway through the journey, deep into that silent, empty stretch, when I first saw him. Far ahead, on the shoulder of the road, was a figure, a man, standing perfectly still, bathed in the red glow of my approaching taillights. My immediate thought was that his car must have broken down. It was a dangerous place to be stranded, especially at night. There's no cell service out there, and another car might not come by for hours. I slowed down, my hand instinctively flicking the switch for my hazard lights. As I got closer, the details started to resolve themselves, and a knot of unease began to tighten in my stomach. He wasn't waving for help. He wasn't even looking at me. He was standing with his back to the road, facing out into the empty desert.
He was wearing a dark, heavy-looking coat, the kind you'd wear in a blizzard, not on a mild desert night. It looked old, almost ancient, and out of place. I pulled up about 50 feet away, my engine a low rumble in the profound silence. I rolled down my window a little further. "Hey, you okay?" I called out. The sound of my own voice felt small and thin against the vastness. There was no response. The figure remained motionless, a dark statue against the starlit horizon. A shiver that had nothing to do with the night air crawled up my spine. Every instinct was screaming at me to just drive away. This was wrong. But the thought of leaving someone stranded, potentially hurt, gnawed at me. "Do you need help?" I shouted, louder this time. Still nothing. He just stood there, his posture rigid, his attention fixed on something in the darkness that I couldn't see. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The logical part of my brain was cycling through explanations. Maybe he was drunk, or on drugs, or just a weirdo. But another part of me, a deeper, more primal part, felt a sense of profound wrongness, a glitch in the fabric of reality. I made a decision. I wasn't getting out of the car. I would call the highway patrol as soon as I got a signal. I put the car back in drive, my foot hovering over the accelerator. As I started to pull away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The man hadn't moved. He was exactly as I had left him, a silent, solitary figure, swallowed by the immense darkness of the desert. I drove on, shaking my head, trying to dismiss the encounter as just another piece of desert weirdness. But the image of him, standing with his back to me, was burned into my mind. The feeling of unease lingered, a cold passenger in the seat beside me. I told myself it was over. I was wrong. For the next 10 miles, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched.
I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a pair of headlights gaining on me, but the road behind me was as black and empty as the road ahead. The silence in the car, once a comfort, now felt heavy and oppressive. I turned the music up, trying to drown out the anxious thoughts spiraling in my head. Who was that man? What was he doing out there? Why didn't he answer me? The questions circled endlessly, each one feeding into the next, creating a loop of paranoia. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was a researcher, a geologist studying rock formations. Maybe he was a photographer capturing the night sky. But the heavy coat, the rigid posture, the utter lack of acknowledgement, it didn't fit any logical scenario. It felt staged, like a scene from a nightmare, carefully arranged to be as unsettling as possible. And then I saw him again. I crested a small hill, and there he was, about a quarter-mile ahead, standing on the shoulder of the road. Same dark coat, same rigid posture, same position, with his back to the road, staring out into the desert. My blood ran cold. It wasn't possible. I was driving at 70 miles per hour. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me. There were no side roads, no shortcuts, just the straight, unwavering line of the highway. My mind scrambled for an explanation. A twin? A prank? Was I seeing things? Was I so tired that my brain was starting to malfunction, projecting the same image over and over? I slowed down again, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. This time, I didn't stop. I couldn't. A primal fear had taken hold, a deep-seated terror that defied all logic. As I passed him, I risked a glance. His face was in shadow, but I could see the collar of the coat was turned up high, obscuring his neck and the lower half of his head. He didn't move a muscle as my headlights washed over him. He was a statue carved from a block of pure dread. I floored it.
The needle on the speedometer climbed to 90, then 100. The car shuddered, the engine whining in protest, but I didn't care. I just needed to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. The desert flew by in a blur of gray and black. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I was breathing in short, ragged gasps. The image of the man was seared onto the inside of my eyelids. Every time I blinked, I saw him. The silence of the desert night was no longer peaceful. It was menacing. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. I drove for what felt like hours, even though the dashboard clock told me it had only been 15 minutes. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. I convinced myself I had imagined it, a trick of the light, a waking dream brought on by fatigue. It had to be, because the alternative was simply too terrifying to contemplate. I was just starting to calm down, my breathing returning to a more normal rhythm, when my headlights picked him out of the darkness for the third time. He was there, standing on the shoulder, waiting for me. And this time, something was different. As I sped towards him, a growing sense of horror dawning on me, he began to turn, slowly, mechanically. His head rotated with a jerky, unnatural movement, like a doll's head being twisted on a plastic joint. I didn't want to see his face. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to look away, to close my eyes, but I was paralyzed, my gaze locked onto the approaching figure. My headlights hit him full on, and for a split second, I saw his face. It was the last thing I ever wanted to see. It wasn't a face, not in any human sense. Where his eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was only smooth, blank skin, like a mannequin, but an old one, worn and polished by time. There were no features, no contours, just a perfect, horrifying void.
The sight shattered the last remnants of my composure. A scream tore itself from my throat, raw and animalistic. I yanked the steering wheel, swerving into the opposite lane, my tires screeching in protest. The car fishtailed wildly, the back end swinging out towards the faceless man. For a horrifying moment, I thought I was going to hit him, but he didn't flinch. He just stood there, his blank face turned towards me, a silent, unmoving sentinel of my terror. I wrestled the car back under control, my breath coming in ragged sobs. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The image of that smooth, featureless face was burned into my mind, a brand of pure horror. The rest of the drive was a blur of panic and adrenaline. I kept the accelerator pinned to the floor, my eyes flitting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. I was convinced that any moment I would see him again, perhaps in the back seat, his blank face reflected in the mirror. The 80-mile stretch of desert felt like an infinite looping nightmare. Every rise in the road, every curve, filled me with a fresh wave of dread. I expected to see him standing there, waiting for me, but the road remained empty. The only monster was the one I carried in my head. I finally saw the distant glow of my hometown on the horizon, a faint smudge of orange against the black sky. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. As I drove into the familiar streets, the streetlights and houses a welcome shield against the oppressive darkness of the desert, the tension in my body began to ease, replaced by a profound, trembling exhaustion. I pulled into my parents' driveway, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition. I sat there for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled,
the silence of the suburban night a stark contrast to the screaming void of the desert. I stumbled out of the car and practically fell through the front door.
My mom was waiting up for me, a worried expression on her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her voice laced with concern. I didn't know how to respond. How could I explain what I had seen? How could I put into words the absolute, soul-crushing terror of that faceless man on the highway? I tried. I stammered out a disjointed account of the figure on the road, the impossible way he kept appearing ahead of me, the blank, featureless face. My parents exchanged a worried glance. My dad, ever the pragmatist, suggested I was overtired, that my mind had been playing tricks on me. He talked about highway hypnosis, about the strange things you can see on long drives at night. I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted a rational explanation, something to anchor me back to the world I knew. But I couldn't shake the feeling, the absolute certainty that what I had seen was real. We didn't talk about it again for the rest of the weekend. We celebrated my dad's birthday. I put on a happy face, but the entire time I felt disconnected, like I was watching my life from a great distance. The image of the faceless man was always there, lurking at the edge of my vision. The world felt thinner, more fragile, like a piece of paper that could be torn at any moment, revealing the horrifying emptiness that lay beneath. The drive back to the city was a test of my sanity. I had to do it. My job, my apartment, my life was there. My parents offered to drive with me, but I refused. I needed to do this alone. I needed to know if he would be there. I needed to prove to myself that it was all in my head. I chose to leave in the middle of the day, thinking the harsh, unforgiving sunlight would be my shield. The desert is different in the daytime. It's still empty, but it's a bright, honest emptiness. The shadows are sharp and clear. There are no places for monsters to hide. For the first 40 miles, my theory held.
The sun beat down on the asphalt, creating shimmering heat hazes in the distance. The road was just a road. The Joshua trees were just trees. The knot of fear in my stomach began to loosen. It was just a dream, I told myself. A terrible, vivid nightmare, but a dream nonetheless. And then I saw something. It wasn't him. It was a car, pulled over on the shoulder ahead. A beat-up old sedan, its hood up, a plume of steam rising into the hot air. A woman was standing beside it, fanning herself with a piece of paper. This was real. A real person with a real problem. The kind of person I had thought the man was all those nights ago. I felt a surge of relief. This was normal. I could handle normal. I slowed down and pulled over behind her. "Trouble?" I asked, rolling down my window. She was probably in her 50s, with kind eyes and a weary smile. "Oh, you're a lifesaver," she said, her voice raspy from the heat. She finally gave up on me, overheated. We stood there for a moment, the sun beating down on us. I offered her the water bottle from my passenger seat. She thanked me, taking a long drink. We talked for a few minutes. Her name was Maria. She was heading to the same city as me to visit her daughter. I told her I could give her a ride, and we could call a tow truck for her car once we got a signal. Her gratitude was overwhelming. Having her in the car with me felt like an exorcism. The fear, the paranoia that had been my constant companion, began to recede. We talked as I drove. She told me about her grandkids, about her garden. I told her about my job. The conversation was easy, normal. The desert outside was no longer a threat. It was just a landscape. We were about 20 miles from where I had seen him the first time. I was feeling confident, almost foolish for my earlier terror. The sun was starting to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "It's beautiful, isn't it?"
Maria said, looking out the window. "I've always loved this drive." And then she said the words that stopped my heart. "But you have to be careful out here, especially at night. There are strange things in the desert." I glanced at her. Her kind smile was gone. Her eyes were fixed on the road ahead, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She turned to me, and her face began to change. It was slow at first, like the features were melting under the skin, softening, losing their definition, as if they were made of warm wax. The lines around her eyes and mouth smoothed out.
Her nose and lips receded, sinking back into the flesh. Her skin became a blank, polished surface of ivory. The air in the car grew heavy and cold, thick with the smell of ozone and dry, ancient dust. The cheerful pop song on the radio dissolved into static. I was sitting next to him. The car was filled with the scent of ozone and dust. I screamed and slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a halt in the middle of the highway. The thing next to me didn't move. It just sat there, its blank face turned towards me, a perfect, impossible void. My door was locked. My hands fumbled with the switch, my fingers numb and useless, my mind screaming, "Get out, get out, get out." The world outside the car seemed to warp and distort, the vibrant colors of the sunset bleeding into each other like watercolor on wet paper. The silence was absolute, a physical pressure against my eardrums. I finally managed to flick the lock and threw the door open, scrambling out, my knees scraping against the rough asphalt. I fell hard, the impact jarring my teeth. I crab-walked backward, kicking up gravel, my eyes locked on the passenger seat. He didn't follow. He just sat there, a silent passenger in my car, an obscene sculpture of my deepest fears. I got to my feet and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran into the desert, away from the road, away from my car, away from that thing.
The thorny branches of creosote bushes tore at my clothes and skin, but I barely felt it. The only thing that mattered was distance. The sun set with an alarming speed, plunging the desert into a deep, terrifying darkness. I was alone, and I was stranded. I don't know how long I ran. The desert at night is a disorienting, alien landscape. Every rock, every cactus, cast long, monstrous shadows in the moonlight. The adrenaline that had propelled me away from the car eventually gave way to a soul-crushing exhaustion. My legs felt like lead, my lungs burned. I collapsed onto the sandy ground, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and fatigue. I was lost. I had no water, no phone. The temperature was dropping fast, the desert heat bleeding away into the night sky. I was going to die out here. The thought was strangely calming. After the sheer, mind-bending horror of what I had experienced, the simple, mundane prospect of dying from exposure felt almost like a relief. I lay there for hours, drifting in and out of a delirious state of consciousness. Was I even awake? The line between nightmare and reality had been irrevocably blurred. I saw the blank face in the shifting shadows of the rocks. I heard whispers in the wind, a dry, sibilant sound that scraped against my nerves. The desert itself seemed alive, a malevolent entity that was slowly digesting me, enjoying my terror. I thought about coyotes, about snakes, the primal fears of a child in the dark, but they were nothing compared to the existential dread that had taken root in my soul. At one point, I was sure I saw him, standing on a distant ridge, a black silhouette against the starry sky, watching me. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to end. I had given up all hope when I saw the headlights, 2 pinpricks of light moving slowly along the highway I had abandoned. A wave of energy, born of pure animal desperation, surged through me. I got to my feet and stumbled towards the lights, waving my arms, shouting until my throat was a raw, bloody mess. The truck, an old Ford driven by a grizzled farmer named Hank, was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. He took one look at my torn clothes, my wild eyes, and my bleeding hands, and told me to get in, no questions asked. I tried to tell him what happened. The words came out in a torrent of babble. I told him about my car, about the woman, about the face. He just nodded slowly, his eyes on the road. "The desert plays tricks on you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Sun gets to you. Best not to think about it too much." When we got to where I had left my car, it was gone. There were no skid marks on the road, no broken glass, no sign that it had ever been there. It had simply vanished, as if the desert had swallowed it whole. Hank drove me the rest of the way to my town. He dropped me off at a 24-hour diner, gave me $20, and told me to call someone. I never saw him again. The police report was a work of fiction. I told them my car had been stolen while I was hiking. The officer gave me a look of bored skepticism.
I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. Who would believe me? I sounded crazy even to myself. They found my car 2 weeks later, abandoned at a gas station in a different state, hundreds of miles away. The report said there was no sign of forced entry. The keys were on the passenger seat. My wallet and phone were still in the glove compartment. The only thing missing was the half-empty water bottle I had given to the woman, to Maria. That was 6 months ago. I have a new car now. I have a new job in a new city. I moved out of my apartment. I tried to erase every trace of that night, to build a new life on the ashes of the old one. But it's always there, lurking in the back of my mind. I don't take long drives anymore. I don't like being alone in quiet places.
Sometimes in a crowd, I'll see a face that seems just a little too smooth, a little too perfect, and the panic will rise in my chest, hot and suffocating. I see him in reflections, in the polished surfaces of windows at night, a fleeting glimpse of a featureless face looking back at me. I know it's not real. It can't be. But I don't know what I saw that night. A ghost? A demon? A glitch in the Matrix? Maybe my dad was right. Maybe it was all in my head, a product of a tired mind on a lonely road. But I know what I saw, and I know that I'll never drive that stretch of highway again, because I know that he's still out there, standing on the shoulder, his back to the road, waiting. And I know that sooner or later, someone else will stop to help.